A stone giant rises from a city skyline, defying gravity and time. Medieval cathedrals seem like impossible structures, built centuries ago without steel frames or computer models. How did they do it? By the end of this story, you will know the hidden methods and forgotten genius that brought these stone mountains to life. We will uncover how master masons used sacred geometry as their secret blueprint, and how armies of laborers hoisted multi-ton blocks into the sky. What does it take to build something meant to last for 1,000 years? At the heart of every impossible structure was a single, brilliant mind. The master mason was a unique fusion of artist, architect, and structural engineer. His name is rarely etched in the stone he shaped, yet his vision defined entire cities. These men were not merely builders, they were keepers of profound secrets. Their knowledge was a closely guarded treasure, passed not in books but from hand to hand and mind to mind through a long and demanding apprenticeship. A young boy would enter a guild as a lowly laborer, spending years just mixing mortar before ever touching a chisel, slowly absorbing the mysteries of the craft. Their blueprints were not pages you could roll up and carry away. They worked from detailed plans laid out full scale on vast, flat surfaces known as tracing floors. Here, in a dedicated room within the cathedral workshop, the master would scratch the entire design of a window, an arch, or even a complex vault directly onto the stone floor using a metal stylus. This life-size drawing became the ultimate guide, the true map from which every stone was precisely shaped on the ground before being lifted into its permanent place in the sky. Imagine the confidence required to commit an entire cathedral to memory and to a dusty floor. A blueprint that could be walked on, but one that would ultimately touch the clouds. This secretive, almost mystical knowledge elevated these men to near legendary status. Whispers followed them from one great building site to the next. Some were said to possess a sixth sense for stone, able to listen to a block and hear a hidden flaw. Others were rumored to have made pacts for their otherworldly skill, their genius seeming too profound to be entirely human. They held the mathematical keys to sacred geometry, the divine proportions that they believed made a building not just strong, but holy. But these intellectual giants could not work alone. Their sublime designs required a different kind of strength, a raw, physical power to match their mental might. The master mason's secret knowledge was written in the language of the universe itself, a code of lines and circles known as sacred geometry. This was not mere mathematics for measurement, it was a spiritual act. They believed that God had created the world using perfect geometric principles, and by using those same principles, they were building a mirror of heaven on earth. The most powerful of these was a ratio known as the golden ratio, a divine proportion found in the spiral of a seashell and the arrangement of petals on a flower. It was a relationship of parts to a whole that the human eye finds inherently beautiful and harmonious. This single magical number became the invisible skeleton of the entire cathedral, governing the relationship between its width and height, the size of its windows, and even the sweep of its arches. This divine blueprint began with the humblest of tools, a compass and a straight edge. With just these two instruments, a master mason could generate an entire cosmos of form. He would start with a simple circle, a symbol of unity in God's perfection. From that circle, he could inscribe a square, then a triangle, and from those basic shapes, every complex form of the cathedral would emerge. The floor plan of the nave might be based on a series of rotating squares. The soaring height of the ceiling could be determined by triangles derived from that original circle. The very spine of the building, from the western entrance to the high altar, was laid out along these geometric lines, creating a structure that felt not just built, but grown, according to a natural and holy order. Every element you see, from the ground to the spire, is a testament to this hidden code. Look at a rose window. Its intricate tracery is not random artistry. It is a complex geometric pattern of overlapping circles and arcs, a cosmic diagram in stained glass. The vaults that curve overhead are not just arches meeting. They are the three-dimensional expression of these same principles, stone versions of the shapes scratched on the tracing floor. This is why these spaces feel so different from any modern building. You were not just standing in a large room, you were standing inside a prayer made of stone, a physical manifestation of a belief that beauty, truth, and divinity are all expressed through the same perfect, eternal geometry. But that divine geometry, that perfect stone prayer, needed to stand upon something just as unshakable. Before a single sculpted saint could gaze down from the heights, the builders faced their first and most brutal challenge: the ground beneath their feet. Medieval cities were not built on perfect, stable plains. They grew along rivers on marshland, over the buried ruins of older settlements, presenting a nightmare of soft, shifting, and unpredictable soil. To raise a stone mountain, you must first conquer the swamp. The solution was as immense as the problem itself. Teams of laborers, often local peasants paid with indulgences for their sins, would begin the backbreaking work of excavation. Their goal was not merely to dig a trench, but to find something solid, the bedrock far below. In many places, this meant digging down through 30, 40, even 50 feet of mud and clay. When the bedrock was simply too deep, or the site was a permanent bog, they engineered an artificial island. They drove thousands of wooden pilings, entire forests worth of oak trees, deep into the soft earth, creating a dense, submerged forest. At Salisbury Cathedral, built on a water meadow, the foundation is a gigantic raft of these pilings, hammered down until they hit a resistant layer, their tops then sawed off perfectly level. Onto this submerged wooden platform, they laid a thick, crisscrossing grid of more timber, and then began stacking the foundation stones, creating a massive, rigid raft that would float on the unstable ground, distributing the incredible weight of the future walls and piers evenly. This was not a gamble, it was a calculated act of faith in engineering. They knew the wood, permanently submerged in the waterlogged soil, would not rot but instead petrify over time, becoming harder than stone. They were not just building for their own lifetime, they were laying a base that had to remain perfectly level for 1,000 years, a silent, stubborn promise made to the future, buried deep in the dark, wet earth. With a foundation laid to last an age, the builders faced their next monumental task, finding the very flesh and bone of the cathedral itself. The choice of stone was a decision that echoed through centuries. Not just any rock would do. Master masons sought out specific types of limestone and sandstone, each with its own personality. Some stones, like the fine-grained limestone from Keene in France, were prized for their ability to be carved into the most delicate foliage and angelic figures. Others, a tougher, denser sandstone, were chosen for the great load-bearing piers that had to shoulder unimaginable weight. This was not merely digging up rock, it was selecting a material that was strong enough to endure, yet soft enough to be shaped by a mason's chisel when first quarried, hardening only later when exposed to the air. Locating the perfect quarry was only the beginning of the conundrum. The real challenge was moving a mountain, one block at a time. These quarries were often miles from the building site, across rugged countryside. How do you transport a block of stone weighing several tons without roads, trucks, or cranes? The answer lay in nature's oldest highways, rivers. In the dead of winter, when the ground was hard, quarried blocks were loaded onto massive wooden sledges. Teams of oxen, the only animals with the necessary slow, relentless power, would drag these sledges to the nearest river. There, the stones were carefully transferred onto wide, flat-bottomed barges. This river journey was a feat of timing and skill. Builders relied on the seasonal rains and spring snowmelt to swell the rivers, creating just enough depth to float their heavy cargo. They became masters of the water, building temporary dams to raise water levels, then breaking them to create a surge that carried the barges forward. For quarries not near a river, the process was even more grueling. They laid down temporary roads of greased wooden rails, and men worked in synchronized teams with levers and winches, inching each colossal block forward in a painstaking, costly procession. The journey of a single stone from the depths of a quarry to the foot of the rising cathedral walls could take weeks. A slow, deliberate pilgrimage of raw material being guided toward its divine purpose. That stone, having completed its slow pilgrimage from the quarry, now met the artist who would give it a voice. The stonecutter was far more than a laborer with a hammer. He was a master of material, a man who could look at a rough block and see the perfect shape sleeping within. His workshop was a symphony of sound, a constant, rhythmic percussion of metal on stone. His toolkit was a collection of specialized instruments, each with a distinct purpose. Heavy axes, swung with precision, knocked off the largest, roughest pieces. Toothed saws, dragged back and forth with sand and water as an abrasive, sliced through softer stone. Drills, turned by a bow-like mechanism, bored clean holes for metal cramps or delicate tracery. But the most crucial tool was often a simple piece of wood or sheet metal, a template. These templates were direct copies, sometimes the very pieces themselves, of the full-scale designs scratched onto the tracing floor by the master mason. The stonecutter would place the template onto his block and trace its exact outline, a perfect translation from the master's two-dimensional drawing into a three-dimensional stone. Every piece of stone was destined for one specific location in the cathedral's vast stone puzzle. A block for the north wall could not be confused with one for the south transept. To prevent chaos, the stonecutters operated a secret signature system known as banker marks. As a mason finished a stone, he would chisel a unique symbol onto its hidden face, a signature known only to the builders. It might be a simple series of lines, a geometric shape, or a crude representation of a tool. This mark was not an artist's signature for fame, it was a practical code. It identified the individual craftsman, allowing the master builder to track the quality and quantity of his work. But more importantly, it told the raising gangs exactly where that stone belonged. A mark resembling an arrow might mean it was the third stone from the left on the fifth course of the western wall. This system of secret signatures turned an impossibly complex construction site into a manageable, orderly process, ensuring that each uniquely shaped piece, carved to interlock perfectly with its neighbors, found its one and only home high in the rising walls. The silent, marked stones were like a disciplined army, each soldier knowing its exact place in the grand formation, waiting for the command to be lifted into the sky. Yet these soaring stone skeletons created a dangerous new problem of their own. The incredible height and the massive stone vaults inside pushed outward with a tremendous, unrelenting force, threatening to burst the walls apart like a barrel stave. The master mason's revolutionary solution was as daring as it was brilliant: the flying buttress. Picture a great stone arm reaching over the side aisles of the cathedral, bracing the high central wall against its own inward push. These external stone ribs work like a powerful shoulder leaning against a bookshelf to keep it upright. The immense weight and thrust from the roof vaults, wanting to spread outwards, is instead caught by these graceful arches and channeled down, away from the fragile walls, and safely into the ground through massive stone piers. This single innovation shattered every architectural rule that came before it. Walls no longer needed to be thick, solid barriers of stone to hold up the roof. They could now be thin, delicate, and most importantly, they could be replaced with vast, luminous sheets of colored glass. The flying buttress was the secret that made the Gothic style possible, transforming dark, heavy Romanesque structures into the breathtaking cages of light we marvel at today. This was not a universally accepted idea, however. To many traditional builders, these external supports looked like a desperate, even ugly, admission of failure, a clumsy crutch for a design that was fundamentally unstable. They could not grasp that this was not a failure of design, but its ultimate triumph, a way to make the building's own forces work for it, to turn weakness into unparalleled strength. It was a revolutionary secret that changed architecture forever, proving that true support did not always have to come from within, but could fly bravely on the outside for all to see. But that stone arm of the flying buttress could not work its magic alone. It needed a hidden partner, a temporary wooden skeleton that held the entire dream in place before the stone could stand on its own. The secret to building a perfect arch was not just in the carved stone, but in the complex wooden framework built beneath it, a structure known as centering. This was the cathedral's biggest open secret, a temporary forest of timber erected with immense precision, only to be torn away in a moment of breathtaking faith. For every arch, every vault, and every great window, carpenters first built a full-scale wooden model. These were not simple supports, they were intricate three-dimensional puzzles, shaped exactly to the inner curve of the intended stonework. The centering for a single large vault could require dozens of major ribs, hundreds of connecting pieces, and thousands of wooden pegs, all cut and fitted on the ground before being hoisted into the dizzying heights of the unfinished building. The design of this falsework was a science in itself. The carpenter had to calculate not only the final shape, but the immense weight of the wet mortar and the dozens of stones that would be piled onto his wooden skeleton. It had to be strong enough to hold this colossal load without sagging, yet simple enough to be disassembled and removed once the mortar had cured. The construction of the centering was a race against time and the elements. The great wooden ribs were assembled on massive trestles, creating a ghostly negative of the future stone vault. Then, the masons would begin their work, carefully laying each carved stone onto this wooden form, trusting that the carpenter's invisible skeleton would not betray them. For weeks or even months, this timber framework bore the entire weight of the growing arch. The entire site held its breath, waiting for the moment the mortar dried and hardened into a single, solid mass. Then came the dramatic climax, the moment of truth known as the striking of the centering. The carpenters would carefully knock out the key wooden supports, often starting from the center and working outwards. A collective sigh of relief would ripple through the workforce as the wooden skeleton was lowered to the ground, leaving behind a perfect, self-supporting stone arch that seemed to defy logic. This temporary forest of timber was the ultimate act of faith, a structure built for the sole purpose of being destroyed, its success measured by its own disappearance. That temporary wooden skeleton was the key to creating one of the most important inventions in architectural history, the vault. But the vault itself was undergoing a dramatic evolution, a journey from heavy, earthbound ceilings to a delicate, airborne stone web. It all began with the simplest form, the barrel vault. Imagine a long, continuous stone tunnel, heavy and imposing, pressing down along the entire length of the wall that supported it. To hold up this immense weight, the walls had to be massively thick, with only tiny windows, leaving the interior spaces dark and cavernous. Builders knew there had to be a better way, a method to lighten the load. Their first breakthrough was the groin vault, created by crossing two barrel vaults at a right angle. This simple intersection created 4 distinct channels, concentrating the downward forces onto 4 corner points instead of the entire wall. This was a major step forward, but the groin vault was still a complex, monolithic structure, difficult to build and requiring immense skill from the masons shaping the curved stone surfaces. Then came the revolutionary leap, the ribbed vault. Instead of building a solid shell of stone, the master masons designed a skeleton. They first erected a framework of slender stone ribs, arching across the space to define the shape of the vault. These ribs were the permanent version of the carpenter's centering, a stone skeleton that was built first. Once this rib cage was in place, the masons simply filled in the spaces between the ribs with much thinner, lighter panels of stone. This was a complete rethinking of the problem. The weight of the ceiling was no longer a diffuse burden. It was now precisely channeled along these elegant stone arcs, focused onto the 4 main pillars below. Because the walls were no longer holding up a solid mass of stone, they could be pierced with enormous windows, flooding the interior with the colored light of stained glass. The ribbed vault transformed the ceiling from a heavy lid into a delicate, intricate web of stone, a testament to an ambition that reached not just for height, but for light itself. This intricate stone web became the very signature of Gothic engineering, a visible map of the forces flowing through the building, turning the ceiling into a breathtaking display of both strength and grace. While the stone ribs channeled the building's great forces, the men who placed them were suspended in a temporary world of wood and rope. This forgotten technology of medieval scaffolding was a breathtaking achievement in its own right, a vast, spindly forest that climbed ahead of the permanent stone walls. Imagine a skeleton of timber poles, lashed together with rope and reinforced with diagonal braces, forming a series of work platforms that could rise hundreds of feet into the air. The builders did not have the luxury of steel bolts or prefabricated sections. Their scaffolding was an organic, evolving structure, tied together with the same knots used by sailors to rig the great ships of the era. It had to be strong enough to support teams of masons, their heavy tools, and the stones they were lifting, yet flexible enough to sway safely in the wind without shattering. There were no safety harnesses, no hard hats. A worker's life depended entirely on the skill of the carpenters who tied the knots and the stability of the timber under his feet. This was a dance with gravity performed daily on a stage of splintering wood. As the walls grew taller, the scaffolding had to be constantly dismantled and rebuilt at a higher level. It was a perpetual cycle, a race against the seasons. The lower sections were taken apart, the long poles hoisted up by rope and pulley, and the entire intricate structure was reassembled on the new, higher ledge of stone. This meant the builders were never working from a static, finished platform. They were building the permanent cathedral from within a temporary one that was always in motion, adapting and climbing toward the sky. The scaffolding was the cathedral's ghost, a fleeting double that lived and breathed and grew just long enough to give birth to the eternal stone monument before vanishing without a trace. High above the city, a stone block weighing more than 2 adult elephants dangled in the air. The secret to this gravity-defying feat was not magic, but machinery, a masterpiece of medieval engineering known as the treadmill crane. This was the beating heart of the construction site, a wooden giant whose groans and creaks were the sound of a cathedral rising. At its core was a massive wooden wheel, as tall as 2 men, with a rope wound around its axle. The power for this machine did not come from an engine, but from human legs. Men, often laborers earning a day's wage, would step inside this enormous wheel and walk, much like a hamster in its wheel, turning the entire mechanism. Their collective weight and momentum provided the brute force, but it was the machine's brain, its gearing system, that made the impossible possible. A large gear attached to the wheel's axle meshed with a smaller gear on the hoisting drum. This simple but brilliant reduction meant that for every dozen rotations the men made inside the great wheel, the hoisting drum might only turn once. This trade-off of speed for power created an immense mechanical advantage, allowing a small team of men to lift staggering weights with a slow, controlled, and surprisingly precise motion. The operator, a skilled craftsman, would control the descent of a multi-ton stone block with nothing more than a simple brake, a wooden wedge pressed against the gears. He could lower a delicate carved statue into its place with the gentle touch of a watchmaker, all while his comrades trudged endlessly in their wooden cage. This was the great crane mystery solved, a perfect marriage of human endurance and ingenious design, turning the simple act of walking into the power to build a mountain. But all that soaring stone and intricate vaulting had a hidden weakness, a secret vulnerability that pure masonry could not solve. Stone is incredibly strong when you push down on it, when it is under compression. But it is terribly weak when you try to pull it apart or stretch it, when it faces tension. The outward thrust from the great vaults and the force of the wind against those towering walls created immense tension, a constant, invisible force trying to tear the building apart. The master mason's ingenious, if secretive, solution was to put an iron grip inside their stone world. They embedded long iron rods, known as tie rods, high up in the walls or across the bases of arches. Think of these as massive, hidden staples, binding opposite walls together, holding them in a tight embrace against the forces trying to push them outward. You can sometimes see the ends of these rods in old cathedrals today, decorated with ornate iron butterflies or stars, little artistic flourishes on the ends of a crucial structural secret. For even more critical joints, especially in the great arches and window frames, they used iron cramps. These were U-shaped or flat pieces of iron that were set into specially carved grooves in adjacent stones, then sealed in place with molten lead. The iron cramp locked the stones together, preventing them from sliding apart, creating a bond that was stronger than the stone itself. In some of the most ambitious structures, they even built complete iron chains right into the masonry, a hidden metal belt cinched tightly around the entire building, holding the dream together from within. This was a brilliant, pragmatic admission that stone alone was not enough. They were secretly reinforcing their creations, using the tensile strength of metal to compensate for the inherent brittleness of rock. It was an ancient form of what we now call reinforced concrete. Yet this clever solution came with a dangerous, hidden flaw, a ticking clock buried in the walls. Iron rusts. When water seeped into the masonry over decades and centuries, the hidden iron began to corrode. Rust occupies more space than the original iron, and this expansion is incredibly powerful. The slowly swelling metal would push against its stone prison, cracking the very blocks it was meant to protect, sometimes even causing spires to lean or fragments of sculpture to explode outward. The masons knew this could happen, but they had no other choice. They were making a calculated trade, solving an immediate and catastrophic danger of collapse for a slower, more manageable problem that would become someone else's responsibility generations later. They built for their own time, trusting that future caretakers would find and repair the damage, a quiet plea for help whispered down through the centuries in the language of cracking stone. Those hidden iron cramps and tie rods held the stone dream together, but they could do nothing to fill the void with meaning. That sacred task was reserved for the most breathtaking alchemy of all, the transformation of common materials into divine light. The cathedral's windows were not merely decorations, they were luminous storybooks, a brilliant solution to a world where few could read. They became known as the poor man's Bible, a way to teach the great stories of Scripture through the universal language of color and light. But creating these windows was a form of magic, a complex dance of chemistry, fire, and art. It all began in a roaring furnace where ordinary sand was melted at a searing heat. To make this sand flow like liquid, the glassmakers added a special ingredient called potash, which was essentially the burned remains of beechwood or ferns. This potent ash acted as a flux, lowering the melting point of the silica and creating a thick, viscous liquid. Into this molten glass, the masters introduced their most precious ingredients, metallic oxides that would birth the colors of heaven. A sprinkle of cobalt oxide produced a deep, celestial blue so costly, it was often reserved for the robes of the Virgin Mary. Copper compounds could create a rich emerald green or a fiery ruby red. The most precious color of all, a true and brilliant red, required the rarest of all elements, gold. Tiny particles of gold suspended in the glass created a deep, transparent crimson that glowed with an internal fire when the sun shone through. Each color had to be made in separate batches, poured and rolled into flat sheets that were often no thicker than a coin, each sheet a unique fragment of a future masterpiece. These radiant sheets of colored glass were then handed over to the glass painter. His work was one of immense patience and precision. He would lay a sheet of glass over a design, a cartoon that outlined the entire scene, and begin his delicate work. Using a special paint made from ground copper or iron filings mixed with a soft glass powder and suspended in a binder like wine or urine, he would paint the fine details, the facial features, the folds of robes, the intricate patterns. This paint was not for color, but for shadow and line, blocking light to create definition. Once painted, each piece of glass was fired in a small kiln. The heat would fuse the paint permanently to the surface, making it as durable as the glass itself. Then came the final act of assembly. The lead cames, those slender strips of H-shaped lead channel, were cut to fit each piece of the puzzle like a custom-made frame. The glass pieces were carefully fitted into these channels, and the joints were soldered together. This lead network was not just a holder, it was a fundamental part of the design, a bold, black line that gave structure and clarity to the luminous image. When this completed panel was finally hoisted into its stone opening and the sun streamed through, the true miracle occurred. The light itself became the final artist, animating the stories, making the colors sing, and transforming the entire stone interior into a kaleidoscope of faith. This was the ultimate goal, to build not with stone alone, but with captured sunlight and storytelling, creating a space where the very air was thick with colored light and sacred narrative. Above the glowing stories told by stained glass, another hidden world was taking shape, a vast and intricate forest of timber. While the stone vaults created the ceiling for the lower levels, the space above them needed its own mighty roof, a protective shell against rain and snow. These timber frames were engineering marvels in their own right, colossal wooden skeletons that spanned the incredible width of the nave without a single central pillar to support them. The most breathtaking of these designs was the hammerbeam roof. Imagine a series of mighty wooden brackets, like the outstretched arms of a giant, projecting from the walls and holding up the entire superstructure. It was a masterful illusion of defiance, creating an open, soaring space below that felt as vast and unobstructed as the sky. The secret to building these wooden wonders lay not in dry, seasoned timber, but in its opposite. Master carpenters specifically sought out green oak, wood that was freshly cut and still full of sap. This might seem counterintuitive, but green oak was their perfect material. It was far softer and easier to carve with their adzes and chisels, allowing them to shape the complex curves and intricate decorations of angels and foliage that often adorn the hammer beams. More importantly, as this green timber slowly dried and hardened in place over the decades, it became stronger and more durable, locking the joints together with an ever-tightening grip. The design of the roof was a geometric puzzle of immense force and counterforce. Each hammerbeam truss was a self-contained structural system. The great horizontal beam, the hammerbeam itself, transferred the roof's weight back to the wall through a massive curved brace. From the end of this beam, a vertical post rose upward, connected by another diagonal strut that pushed against a central collar beam, tying the whole assembly together. Every piece was in tension or compression, each member balancing the other in a delicate wooden dance. The carpenter's genius was in understanding these forces, knowing exactly where a joint needed to be pegged and how an angle could channel a load. They used joints that were works of art themselves, complex lap joints and mortise and tenon connections secured with stout oak pegs, creating a structure that was flexible enough to sway in a storm yet rigid enough to stand for centuries. This hidden forest above our heads, this intricate web of unseasoned oak, is the final masterpiece of the cathedral, a testament to the quiet, patient genius of the woodworkers who built a second, wooden mountain to shelter the first one made of stone. But that hidden forest of timber and those glowing windows of glass served another, more ethereal purpose. The stone cathedral was not just a visual masterpiece, it was a giant musical instrument, meticulously tuned to transform sound into something divine. Every surface, from the smooth polished floors to the complex curves of the vaults overhead, was part of an acoustic design calculated to elevate the human voice into a spiritual experience. In our modern world, we fill rooms with soft materials, carpets, and curtains to absorb sound, to make it clear and direct. The medieval builders did the exact opposite. They wanted sound to live, to breathe, to linger. The vast, uninterrupted volume of the nave, the hard stone walls, and the glass windows all reflected sound waves instead of swallowing them. A single spoken word could take 10, 15, even 20 seconds to fully fade away, a phenomenon known as a long reverberation time. This would be a nightmare for a casual conversation, but for the liturgy, it was perfection. The Gregorian chants of the monks were not composed of quick, sharp notes. They were long, flowing, single-line melodies. In this resonant space, these simple chants would overlap and blend, creating a continuous, shimmering curtain of sound that seemed to have no beginning and no end. It felt less like a performance and more like the building itself was humming, singing along with the choir. The specific shapes of the vaults played a crucial role in this acoustic alchemy. The curved surfaces of the ribbed vaults acted as natural sound diffusers, scattering the music evenly throughout the space, so that someone standing at the back of the cathedral could hear the choir just as richly as someone standing directly beneath it. There were no dead spots, no echoes. The sound was omnipresent, a physical sensation that washed over the congregation. When the great pipe organs were introduced, their deep, complex chords would swell and fill this immense container. the individual notes merging into a majestic, thunderous drone that you could feel in your bones. This was not an accidental byproduct of stone construction. It was an intentional secret. The master masons and the clergy understood that the architecture could manipulate human emotion through sound. The long reverberation created a sense of timelessness, blurring the lines between one note and the next, between the voices of the present and the echoes of the past. It made the music feel eternal, as if it had always been there and always would be, an audible manifestation of heaven itself. You were not just hearing a chant, you were standing inside one, enveloped by a sound that the very stones had been shaped to amplify and prolong. That divine sound, that stone instrument, required a different kind of fuel to be built. A financial engine had to run for decades, sometimes centuries, to bring a single cathedral to completion. This was not a project funded by a single king's treasury, but a vast, continuous river of money flowing from every level of society. At the source of this river were the wealthiest patrons, bishops and kings who saw the cathedral as a testament to their own power and piety. A bishop might pledge his entire personal fortune or donate years of income from church lands to get the foundations laid. Kings granted charters, special permissions, and vast tracts of forest for timber and stone. But these grand gestures were only the beginning. The real, ongoing financial lifeblood came from the people. The most famous, and later infamous, method was the sale of indulgences. The church taught that certain good works could reduce the amount of time a soul spent in purgatory. Contributing to the construction of God's house was considered the ultimate good work. So, pardoners or church agents would travel from town to town, offering written indulgences in exchange for a donation. For a few coins, a peasant could purchase a reduction of their own or a loved one's suffering in the afterlife. It was a powerful, emotionally charged incentive that turned every family's fear and hope into a brick in the wall. Another powerful financial magnet was the relic. A cathedral that possessed a revered object, like a splinter from the true cross or the bone of a major saint, became a destination. Pilgrims would travel hundreds of miles, enduring immense hardship, to pray before these holy remains. And where pilgrims went, their money followed. They needed food, lodging, and souvenirs, and they made generous offerings at the relic's shrine. The cathedral treasury at Canterbury grew immensely wealthy from the pilgrims visiting the shrine of Thomas Becket, their donations funding constant expansion and repair. Beyond these major sources, the entire community was expected to contribute. Guilds of wealthy merchants would often sponsor an entire chapel or a magnificent stained glass window, their own pride and piety forever displayed in the holy space. Butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers all gave what they could, their small, steady donations adding up over a lifetime. This was a financial machine built on faith, fear, pride, and community spirit, a delicate balance that had to be maintained for generation after generation. The foundation stone might be laid by a king, but the final spire was paid for by the countless hopes and pennies of his poorest subjects, a mountain of stone built on a mountain of small, faithful acts. A cathedral's stone was more than just a building material. It was a page in a giant, three-dimensional book. Every single element, from its grandest gesture to its smallest carving, was saturated with a hidden symbolic language. The most fundamental code was the very shape of the building itself. Seen from above, the classic cathedral forms the unmistakable outline of a cross. Entering through the western doors, you step into the foot of the cross, the long nave stretching before you represents the body of Christ, and the transepts that cross it form his outstretched arms. Your entire journey through the space is a symbolic walk along the body of the Savior, culminating at the head of the cross, the high altar in the eastern end, which was always oriented toward Jerusalem, the city of his resurrection. This architectural crucifix was the first and most powerful lesson, a constant, silent reminder of the foundational story of the faith, understood by everyone who walked its length. High above, staring down from the gutters and parapets, another set of symbols kept watch. The grotesque and often frightening gargoyles were not merely decorative rain spouts. Their monstrous forms, part beast, part demon, served a clear theological purpose. They represented the evil and chaos that existed outside the sanctity of the church, the very sins from which the faithful sought refuge within the stone walls. Seeing these demonic figures carved into the holy structure itself was a potent visual sermon. It taught that evil was always present, always threatening, but that the church provided protection, channeling that threatening chaos away like rainwater from a roof. Inside, a more mysterious figure often peered from the capitals of columns and the shadows of arches, the Green Man. This curious face, surrounded by or even made of lush foliage, with leaves sprouting from its mouth and eyes, seems a pagan relic in a Christian space. But here he was baptized into a new meaning. He became a symbol of God's creation and the resurrection of the soul, a reminder that just as nature dies in winter and is reborn in spring, so too can humanity be reborn through faith. He was the soul, flowering with divine grace. This symbolic world was populated by a stone cast of characters designed to instruct and inspire. The statues of saints that lined the portals were not just art. They were a heavenly roster of exemplars. A pilgrim, unable to read a saint's life, could instead look up and see St. Peter holding his keys to heaven, or St. Bartholomew clutching his own flayed skin. Each attribute, every object held, was a visual clue to their story and their martyrdom. These figures were idealized, serene, and eternal, showing the common person the model of a holy life and the glorious reward that awaited the faithful. They were the ultimate heroes, their stone faces offering a silent, powerful promise of a better world to come. This entire system, from the cruciform floor plan to the last leafy face, was a deliberate and brilliant strategy. For a population that could not read the written word, the cathedral itself became the text. It was a walk-through Bible where the stories of sin and redemption, of creation and salvation, were not told, but shown. You learned your faith not by reading a book, but by walking through one, your eyes tracing the stories carved in stone and glowing in glass, a continuous, immersive sermon written in the universal language of image and symbol. High above the city streets, those monstrous stone figures serve a surprisingly practical purpose. They are the guardians of the masonry, sophisticated drainage systems carved into terrifying shapes. A gargoyle is not merely a sculpture, it is a meticulously engineered water spout. Its long, open mouth is not for roaring, but for pouring. A hidden channel runs along its back, collecting rainwater from the gutter system of the roof. This water is then funneled through the gargoyle's hollow body and launched far out from the cathedral's wall through its gaping maw. This brilliant design solves a critical problem. Without these projections, rainwater would simply cascade down the face of the building, seeping into the mortar between stones, freezing in winter, and slowly but surely eroding the very fabric of the structure over decades. By throwing the water clear of the wall, the gargoyle protects the delicate carvings and the integrity of the stonework below. It is a perfect marriage of function and form, where a vital piece of plumbing is transformed into a work of terrifying art. But their purpose runs far deeper than just managing the weather. These demonic sentinels were believed to be powerful protectors. The medieval world was filled with a very real fear of evil spirits and malevolent forces. The gargoyles, with their fearsome horns, twisted bodies, and leering faces, were thought to act as a spiritual scarecrow. The logic was simple. If these monstrous creatures, representing the very essence of chaos and evil, were bound to the church and forced to serve it, then lesser evil spirits would be too terrified to approach. They were the holy building's permanent watchdogs, staring down from the ramparts to ward off any unseen threats, creating a sacred, protected space within. For the common people looking up from below, these figures served a third, deeply moral purpose. They were a stone sermon, a constant, visible reminder of the sins and vices that threaten the soul. A grotesque figure clutching its throat might represent the sin of gluttony. Another with a bag of coins could symbolize the greed that corrupts the heart. These were not abstract ideas, they were physical manifestations of damnation, showing the faithful the hideous consequences of a life led astray. The message was clear: the church was a sanctuary from the monstrous evils of the world. evils that were literally carved into its own skin as a warning. The gargoyle stands as a complex symbol, a functional machine, a spiritual guardian, and a moral teacher, all carved from a single block of stone. Yet those same stone sermons and divine proportions hold a deeper, more controversial secret. Behind the orthodox symbols lies a whisper of heresy, a shadow of beliefs the church officially condemned. The master masons, with their secret knowledge and near magical skills, were often suspected of harboring ideas that strayed from strict doctrine. Their travels brought them into contact with different cultures and philosophies, especially during the Crusades, when European builders encountered the advanced mathematics and intricate geometry of the Islamic world. These were not just technical exchanges, they were meetings of minds that opened new ways of thinking about space, pattern, and the very nature of the divine. Some historians speculate that this cross-cultural pollination brought back more than just building techniques. It brought esoteric ideas that were then subtly encoded into the cathedral's very fabric. The most persistent rumors swirl around the influence of the Cathars, a heretical sect that flourished in southern France. The Cathars held a dualist belief, viewing the material world as the creation of an evil god and the spiritual world as pure and good. To them, an ornate church built of heavy stone was almost a prison for the spirit, not a gateway to heaven. Yet, some see a strange echo of their beliefs in the intense push for lightness and height in Gothic design. Could the drive to dematerialize the wall, to replace stone with ethereal colored light, have been a quiet, architectural rebellion against the very idea of a material church? It is a tantalizing, if unprovable, thought. The evidence, if it exists, is not in written records but in the silent language of geometry. Look closely at the pentagram, a five-pointed star found hidden in the tracery of some rose windows and the floor plans of certain chapels. To the Orthodox Church, this symbolized the 5 wounds of Christ, but within esoteric traditions, it represented the golden ratio and the human form, a symbol of hidden knowledge and microcosmic harmony. The master masons, masters of sacred geometry, would have understood both meanings. They operated in a world where a single shape could hold a public, orthodox meaning for the bishops who paid them, and a private, philosophical one for themselves and their guild brothers. This is the great cathedral mystery. The line between orthodox devotion and heretical knowledge is drawn not in ink, but in stone and light. Were these men devout Christians building houses for God? Or were they something more, philosopher-artists who wove a deeper, older truth into the heart of Christendom's greatest monuments? The stones themselves will never tell, leaving us to wonder if the greatest secret of the cathedral is not how it was built, but why. A single lifetime was never enough to complete a cathedral. These structures were not projects, they were dynasties in stone, demanding the patient labor of grandparents, parents, and children. The master mason who laid the foundation stones would be dust long before the final spire was capped. This reality forced a unique and profound collaboration across time. The original master's full-scale drawings on the tracing floor became sacred texts, guiding the hands of successors he would never meet. Yet this was not a static process. A new master, trained in a different region or a later period, might introduce a newer, more daring vaulting technique halfway through the nave's construction. You can literally see these shifts in style frozen in the architecture. The lower levels of a wall might exhibit the heavier, rounded arches of the early Gothic period, while the upper levels, built 50 years later, explode into the flamboyant, intricate tracery of a new era. This created a living timeline, a vertical patchwork of history where each generation left its own distinct signature. Maintaining a unified vision under these conditions was an act of collective faith. The building itself became the constant, the one enduring plan that outlasted every individual craftsman, every bishop, and every royal patron. A team would spend 20 years perfecting the south transept, only for their sons to move on to the north transept, applying slightly refined methods learned from their fathers. This slow, generational rhythm imbued the work with a quality impossible to rush. There was no frantic deadline, only the steady, relentless march of progress measured in decades. The cathedral you walk through today is not the product of one brilliant mind, but a chorus of thousands, a collaboration stretched so thin across time that the final, breathtaking unity seems almost a miracle. How could so many hands across so many years create something that feels so perfectly whole? The final and most daring act of the cathedral builders was the spire, a stone needle stitched into the sky. This was the ultimate defiance of gravity, pushing masonry to its absolute limit. The engineering challenge was immense. A spire is not a solid block of stone, it is a hollow shell, and its great height makes it a lever for the wind. A powerful gust could easily topple it if its construction was flawed. The secret to its stability lay in its internal skeleton. Builders constructed a massive central stone pillar, a spine running up the center of the spire. Around this core, they built the outer stone skin, connecting it to the central pillar with a web of radiating stone ribs. This created a rigid, box-like structure that could resist twisting and bending. Inside this stone cage, they secreted a forest of iron. Long iron bars were run vertically through the masonry, binding the entire assembly together like a bundle of sticks, using the tensile strength of metal to compensate for the brittleness of stone. They were building a vertical bridge, an entity designed to sway ever so slightly without shattering, a delicate dance with the elements that continues to this day. But the sky held another, more unpredictable enemy. Lightning was a constant and terrifying threat. A single strike could explode the stonework, showering the city below with deadly fragments, or worse, set the entire wooden roof structure ablaze, reducing centuries of work to ash. For hundreds of years, there was no defense but prayer. Spires were frequently rebuilt after being shattered by storms. The solution finally arrived not from the mason's lodge, but from the scientist's laboratory. In the 18th century, the lightning rod was invented. This simple metal pole, grounded by a cable running down the side of the building, offered a deliberate path for the electrical charge, safely channeling the fury of the storm into the earth. It was a modern answer to an ancient problem, a quiet admission that even the most divine of constructions sometimes needed a little help from science. The spire, therefore, stands as a monument to two kinds of courage: the medieval courage to build it, and the Enlightenment courage to finally protect it. But the master mason's brilliant vision and the stonecutter's precise artistry were utterly dependent on an anonymous army. Thousands of forgotten souls formed the human bedrock upon which the cathedral truly stood. While history remembers the architects, it was the carters, the mortar mixers, and the unskilled laborers who provided the relentless, physical force that turned a drawing on a floor into a mountain of stone. Their lives were a cycle of back-breaking toil from sunrise to sunset. The carter, for instance, was a master of logistics, navigating his ox-drawn wagon through treacherous, unpaved roads, constantly fighting mud and ruts to deliver the precious stone from the river barges to the site. His success or failure could halt the entire project. Then there were the mortar mixers, teams of men who worked in a perpetual cloud of lime dust, blending sand, water, and quicklime in vast pits. This was a dangerous task, as the slaking lime produced intense heat and could cause severe burns. The mixture had to be perfect: too wet and it would not set, too dry and it would fail to bind the stones for centuries. Every specialized role was crucial. Consider the widower, the leather worker whose craft was vital to the great cranes. He tanned and treated the hides of oxen to produce the massive ropes that hoisted the stones. These ropes had to be incredibly strong, flexible, and resistant to the weather, a lifeline upon which every lifted block and every worker's safety depended. Around this perpetual motion of labor, a vibrant, chaotic, and temporary city would spring up. This was the lodge, a bustling encampment of workshops, forges, taverns, and cramped lodgings that clung to the skirts of the rising cathedral. It was a world of its own, filled with the shouts of foremen, the smell of baking bread, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, and the constant, ever-present dust. For the laborers and their families, life was hard, precarious, and often short. Accidents were commonplace. A slipping stone, a fraying rope, a misplaced step on the high scaffolding could mean instant death. They worked for a daily wage, sometimes paid in coin, sometimes in food and ale, and their names are almost entirely lost to us. They are the great silence in the cathedral's story, the human river of muscle and sweat that, drop by drop, over generations, built a civilization's greatest dream. That divine sound and soaring stone relied on a hidden glue, a recipe so potent its bond has lasted 800 years. The mortar between the cathedral's stones is not the simple sand and water paste we use today. It was a form of medieval concrete, engineered with a secret chemistry that modern scientists are still trying to fully decode. The base ingredients were deceptively simple: sand, water, and lime. But the lime was the magical component. It started as lumps of limestone, quarried from the earth and then cooked in a roaring kiln for days at a searing heat. This process, called calcination, drove off carbon dioxide and left behind a volatile powder known as quicklime. This was a dangerous substance, capable of generating intense heat and even igniting when mixed with water. The masons would carefully slake the quicklime, adding just enough water to turn it into a smooth, putty-like hydrated lime. This lime putty was then mixed with sand, but not just any sand. The master masons were meticulous, choosing clean, sharp-grained sand that would create a strong mechanical bond, locking the mixture together. The precise ratio was a closely guarded secret of each lodge, a formula passed from master to apprentice. Yet the true mystery lies in the bizarre additives they sometimes mixed in. Historical accounts and laboratory analysis of ancient mortar have revealed traces of unexpected organic materials. Some recipes called for the addition of animal blood. The proteins in blood, when combined with lime, can create a slightly stronger, more waterproof binder. Other batches included egg whites or even curdled cheese. These strange ingredients weren't mere superstition. They were early chemical experiments. The fats and proteins in these organic compounds could alter the mortar's setting time, making it less brittle and giving it a subtle flexibility that helped it withstand centuries of shifting and settling without cracking. This mortar was not just a filler, it was a living, breathing part of the structure. As it cured over years and decades, it would slowly reabsorb carbon dioxide from the air, turning back, ever so slowly, into a version of the limestone it once was. This process, called carbonation, is why the mortar in these ancient walls is often as hard as the stone blocks it binds. The master masons were unknowingly practicing a form of chemistry, creating a synthetic stone that could flex and breathe with the building, a testament to their profound, practical genius. They built for eternity, and their hidden glue has held fast, a silent promise kept in every crack between the stones. Even the most divine plans were not immune to earthly realities. A cathedral was a living experiment, and its builders were learning in real time. Their genius often revealed not in perfection, but in how they responded to failure. For all their sacred geometry and iron cramps, these stone giants were subject to the relentless forces of gravity and the unpredictable ground beneath. Look closely, and you will see the legacy of these struggles written in the building's very skin. The famous leaning pillars in Winchester Cathedral's crypt are a perfect example. They tilt at drunken angles, not from poor construction, but because the entire structure began to sink into the soft clay beneath its foundations. The medieval masons had not fully understood the varying load-bearing capacity of the soil across the site. Rather than tear it all down, they adapted. They accepted the lean and continued building upwards, correcting the angle course by course until the walls were once again vertical, a testament to their pragmatic ability to solve a problem they could not prevent. Sometimes, the initial design itself was flawed. A master mason might push the limits of height and lightness too far, creating a vault so ambitious that the walls began to bow outwards under the strain. This was not a sign of incompetence, but of courage. The original design for Beauvais Cathedral in France was so audaciously tall that its choir vaults collapsed twice. Each disaster was a brutal lesson, forcing the builders to add more and stronger flying buttresses, turning the structure into a cage of stone supports that barely contained its own ambition. These spreading walls tell a story of trial and error. You can often see a jumble of different styles of buttressing on a single cathedral, with later, heavier arches added decades or even centuries after the initial build to shore up a weakness no one had foreseen. Every crack, every settled pier, every later addition is a chapter in a long conversation between the builders and their materials. They were not infallible gods of stone, but brilliant problem solvers who left a record of their education in the masonry itself. The true secret is that their greatest skill was not avoiding mistakes, but learning how to make the building itself teach them how to fix its own flaws. So these are the secrets of the stone mountains. A cathedral stands not as a single act of creation, but as a chorus of countless discoveries. It is the master mason's sacred geometry, the revolutionary leap of the flying buttress, and the hidden iron grip of tie rods holding the dream together. It is the slow pilgrimage of stone from the quarry and the patient, generational labor of thousands whose names are lost to time. It is the financial river of faith, flowing from the coins of peasants to the treasuries of kings, all fueling a vision that would outlive them all. These structures are the ultimate testament to human ingenuity, a profound collaboration between art and science, faith and physics, all converging to create something meant to touch the divine. They remind us that our greatest achievements are not solo performances, but symphonies composed across centuries. The next time you pass a local cathedral or an old stone church, pause for a moment. Look past its familiar silhouette and see it for what it truly is: a mountain of solved mysteries, a library of hidden knowledge written in stone and light. Which of these ancient secrets, from the tracing floors to the treadmill cranes, left you the most amazed? Share your wonder in the comments below, and let's keep the story alive.